know that we'll be recording the session. Thanks very much, Zoom. Okay, fantastic. So the agenda we've got for you today, we're going to do a bit of an introduction into the landscape review very quickly. So that'll be about 5 minutes. What we are doing next, so the plan for the next statement of work that we're going into now. So we'll do 5 minutes on that. We'll have a section, the largest section in the show and tell on shared or common technology, which Henry sent out a bit of a note about last night, which will include a bit of an interactive breakout session, which would be good fun. And then we'll have plenty of times for questions, and we're also doing questions throughout. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to kind of start some discussions, put any questions, comments, thoughts, opinions in the chat box, and we'll pick them up in the different intervals that we break for questions. And it'd be great to get some of those in. Cool, if you could flick to the next screen, if that's okay, Henry. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but this is just why we are here. We are here to deliver, oh, that's just popped off me. We are here to support Wales to deliver better digital public services sustainably. I won't dwell on that, and I'll flick to the next slide unless there's any immediate questions that we can come back and answer. This is our team. There's been a couple of changes recently, so probably more so to note. My name's Hannah. I'm the delivery manager on the project over on the right hand side there. Antonio has gone on paternity leave, you've got that in brackets there, and Katie has come to fill that spot. Katie, hopefully you're there and able to unmute yourself if you want to come in and say a quick hi.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi everyone. Good to meet you. Yep, as Hannah said, I'll be covering for Antonio and acting as a kind of service designer, so making sure that everything we look at is being considered in an end-to-end way. So look forward to having more conversations with lots of you.
Perfect, thanks Katie. And then I'll pass on to Henry now.
Thanks, Hannah. So I'm just going to give a bit of a recap about the landscape review beta phase, which is the work we've been doing since January of this year. We have just finished our beta report within CDPS, and we are looking forward to sharing more of that kind of detailed content in the future, either in the form of a blog post or sharing the report itself, or maybe perhaps both. But I will just recap kind of the key findings. So starting with what was the aim of the overall landscape review. So we have aimed to uncover the most significant challenges currently present in digital services in Wales, and then to make the case for which of those challenges do we think public services should come together to tackle them. And we'd again stress here that this is not just about identifying things for CDPS to do. We're really keen to understand those most pressing challenges that we need to work together to resolve. This is just a brief overview of our approach. So we've spoken to a really wide range of organisations delivering public services. I think now more than 50 organisations across Wales, and more than 140 individual services, generally discussing the priorities of those organisations and services, and in particularly the challenges, in order to understand which of them are kind of cross-cutting and common across Wales. So from that, we've then evaluated the challenges and created a short list. And then through the beta phase, we've looked at these in a lot more detail, started to understand the scale of the problem, and potentially some of the areas where we might actually get into it and start to tackle it. We ended up looking at 10 topics in quite a lot of detail that really bubbled up as the most common through the earlier phases of the project. Of those, we have recommended that 8 of them are sufficiently large scale and maybe tractable at the moment. So we think that we should work on tackling them together. And those 8 are presented here. I think we have talked about a few of them in previous sessions, but again, we will share more detail on this in the future. But these are the 8 that we've put forward. 2 that we have not recommended get worked on or have additional kind of focus added to them at the moment is firstly cybersecurity, which we do think is a key challenge for Wales, but relative to some of those other challenges that we've identified, so for example case management, there is more going on looking at cybersecurity at the moment, so we haven't recommended that something additional be developed in that space. Then the final 10th opportunity was looking at paying citizens, which was us investigating whether it would be helpful to create some kind of service or some kind of platform or component that other public services could use to help directly send money to citizens. The obvious use case in the UK there is benefits payments, but there are various other organisations and those within Wales that might use that. Based on our criteria and our approach through the landscape review, we haven't put this forward as something that we think that Wales should work on, but we do note that there are some incoming policy changes. Particularly, I'd call out the universal benefits, the UBI pilot, which potentially might change this in the future, but at the moment we haven't recommended putting it forward. This just gives us a sense of some of the ways in which we evaluated these different opportunities relative to each other. The two kind of key criteria presented on here is with the y-axis is the high strategic alignment with CDPS's goals. And there's a couple of things within that, but in particular, that is about supporting mission 1 of the Welsh Government digital strategy, which is about getting organisations and the public involved in delivering great digital services and excited about doing so. And that's something we've assessed through a few means. Whereas on the x-axis is our analysis of the risk involved in delivering these benefits. So that is in some way how complicated we see these challenges and where we think that we can get the most benefit from tackling them now. That was just a brief recap of our findings over the beta report, but do go back through our old YouTube videos of our previous show and tells, and we talk more about many of those cases. I think I'm now going to pass on to Roshan to talk about where we're focusing on for the next 6 weeks.
Thanks, Henry. So as we are moving forward from the beta, we have a few areas of focus to target basically some of the gaps in CDPS's knowledge of the landscape, which we think will really tie together the great work that's been done so far. So first and foremost, just on the next slide, thanks. We've started to codify the data and the intelligence that we've collected. So we've collected a lot of information across the surveys that we've done, the conversations that we've had with individuals or focus groups across at least 53 organisations in Wales now, and other desk research that we've done. So our aim is basically to create a resource for our data so that it's really easy to pick up the knowledge that we've built up in quite a self-service way. So for example, potentially having an internal CDPS wiki of some form. And we're really keen to make sure that anyone in CDPS can come to it cold and get maximum value from the work that we've done over the next few months and even years. And then the next area that we'll be focusing on includes reviewing our findings and building our understanding of high impact, often statutory services provided by local authorities, where we think that some form of collaboration or support from the public sector might make a real difference to the delivery of those services and the experience of users either in running or accessing those services. So we're thinking things along the lines of housing support, waste, revenues and benefits, kind of the really important services that ordinary citizens and businesses use day to day. And then finally, we are developing our understanding of shared or common technologies that are currently used across Wales. So in particular, we are investigating the benefits and risks of those shared or common technologies. We're really interested in both the benefits of greater collaboration on technology, but we're also keen to understand the risks around lots of organizations actually relying on quite a small number of platforms and potentially without knowing it. So this is an area of focus which we want to also take a look at today in the breakout rooms shortly, which will be quite exciting. Great, I think those are the main areas which we're looking to cover in this next phase. And so firstly, are there any questions on this? Or secondly, are there any areas which people might have sort of connections that they can make for the team, or maybe they know of other pieces of work that are going on elsewhere in Wales or beyond, which might basically help us and can feed into our work. So open up to questions, or if anyone has any sort of contributions, feel free to drop it in the chat or say it. Sarah, I see your hand is up.
Sorry, yeah. So I guess I'm really interested to understand a bit more about the criteria that you used when you were looking at the different services and how you evaluated them. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and just to clarify, is that specifically for the local authority point about the services that we want to investigate a bit further?
I meant in general across when you looked at all the different areas.
Okay, so for the investment cases as well,
Yeah,
put forwards.
But both would be useful.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just quickly start off with the local authority side of things. So in order to sort of get that long list, back in the alpha phase of the project, when the team were meeting lots of the different local authorities, we developed a long list of all the services that were which are typically being provided by local authorities, so by the councils. And then from that, we've gone through and estimated both the use, so either in transactions or number of users of those different services, as well as how high profile they are. So kind of, again, the relevance to ordinary citizens and businesses, how important they are in basically winning hearts and minds if we were to say transform a service, or if that service was to improve in its delivery. We then took that short list of high impact services and tested it in the beta with all of the digital leaders from local authorities that we met with. And so that's how we've come out with a list of the statutory services that we want to look at further next phase. And in doing that, we want to look at it end to end, so not just focusing in on the digital aspects. And then in terms of the investment cases and how we've looked at the strategic alignment and criteria around that, we've gone through a similar process, firstly, of just understanding what the impact of those areas are on the delivery of services. So for example, if it's case management, really understanding the role that case management plays in a lot of the services and organizations that we've spoken to, and what transforming or improving that, what impact that might have. We've also taken steps to align with CDPS's own sort of remit, based on it kind of the internal discussions around where CDPS to make its impact going forward. So in that sense, we've sort of ranked them all or put them on that 2 by 2, which Henry presented. Hannah, did you want to come in there?
No, I was just gearing myself up for the next question, Roshan, so please finish off. That's
all right. I'm not sure if anyone else on the team has anything just to add on how we've sort of done that strategic evaluation, but otherwise, does that hopefully answer your question, Sarah?
I just add a little bit, just that there's been kind of a various stages of prioritization given the very, very large scope of the landscape review. So starting with understanding all digital services across Wales, understanding whether there are particular organisations or particular services that would benefit from support, or understanding whether there are kind of common challenges. So it's kind of the challenge for us has been taking that kind of massive scope and limiting it down. We've done that through a number of stages. At each stage, there have been like a set of strategic criteria that we've used at different points, and I think we have talked about those in previous show and tells. But some of those were quantitative measures where we might have. So I know one measure used was the number of user journeys for a particular service, and that was trying to understand on the basis that we generally wanted to work, or we're trying to prioritise high impact services that have a greater impact on people in Wales. So that was when we had a quantitative measure. In other cases, we've used more qualitative measures where the team, where we've got multiple people within CDPS to score something on a particular scale. And for example, where we've wanted to estimate kind of complexity of a particular problem area, that's the approach we've taken there. But there has been a range used at different points. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact list of criteria to hand at the moment, but I'd be very happy to kind of talk about that more offline as well.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question, Sarah.
Yes, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. There's a question that's come through in the chat from Angela. I'll read it out, and then if one of the team wants to jump on and answer, if not, I can. Have shared care records come up as a priority across health, social care, third sector, e.g. hospice, palliative care? What standards are you referring to for digital maturity, please? Does anyone want to?
Brill, I think I'll take that one, just as I've been focusing maybe more on the kind of health engagement. I think I just start by saying that we haven't, given the already very wide scope of the landscape review and the kind of very fragmented landscape, we haven't talked to third sector organisations, so hospices and palliative care organisations, but we have talked to quite a few social care and health teams so far in the project, and these shared care records and the idea of making care better by joining up the kind of patient journey, as it were, is something we've heard in bits and pieces, and I think, and I don't know if anyone wants to, who's been on the project for a little bit longer than me, would add in here, but especially kind of regarding use of tools like Wikis, to share kind of that kind of view of a patient across the different services. So although there's different organizations involved, as far as the patient is concerned, they've got kind of one journey throughout, and that links quite nicely to the second point, asking about what we mean by kind of digital maturity in health. And what we've meant by that in the kind of investment case that we've written up is an understanding of kind of using patient-focused, user-focused design when designing systems and services that go into health and care organisations. Often we found that these tools that are used in health and care, the systems that are designed, might not always perfectly meet the kind of user needs of the clinicians or patients that are using them. And it's about bringing that approach that we've seen elsewhere, of kind of thinking of a service and thinking of how the user views a service, for example, their kind of journey through kind of a hospital system, rather than taking a look at which systems do we need to buy, how do we need to link them up, and maybe working in a more agile way. So I don't know if maybe Henry wants to add anything to that, has been on the project slightly longer than I have, but yeah.
I don't think I'd add anything from the landscape review side. That's a good answer.
Great.
Angela, is that answering your question?
Angela asked the question via chat, so if that hasn't, Angela, please feel free to reach out in the chat again, or alternatively, if you have our kind of contact details. Oh, there we go. No problem at all. Hopefully it has, Angela. I wonder if there's time to take one more question, if we could quickly cover it off, and then we'll move on. So question from Jess: how does CDPS's role to support local authorities differ from the role of WLGA? It's quite a tongue twister.
Yeah, so just on that point, I think I just sort of clarify again kind of how we've come through the landscape review. And so part of our scope or remit has very much been to understand and articulate the problem space in local government. So understanding what are the problems and challenges in local authorities, and less so to come up with the specific solutions or interventions to target those. So the information that we've collected, we're hoping will be valuable not just to CDPS internally, but also to WLGA. And so we've been speaking to Sam Hall on a semi-regular basis. And so now going forwards, now that we've sort of presented these investment cases and we've really laid out the challenges at hand and recommended that the Welsh public sector sort of ramps up efforts to tackle those, I think it will be an ongoing conversation between CDPS and WLGA to really make it clear what the differences are between the support that is offered, and CDPS can look into now more specific support with kind of actual councils. And we have put forward potential partners or potential councils, which we think could be areas to investigate more for actual collaboration. But I think that thinking needs to be done now in the future phases. Hopefully that answers your question, Beth.
Great, and I think Anne's just put a bit of a comment in the chat there as well, and an awesome from Jess. I think we're covered. Should we move on?
Just before we move on, if it's okay, I've just had a message from Nigel from the Welsh Government in the chat. I just want to quickly correct myself from earlier that the Welsh Government is not running a universal income pilot, but they're running a basic income pilot specifically for care leavers. So I just want to issue that correction from what I presented earlier. Back to you, Henry. Sorry.
Thanks, Henry. Sorry, we've got a bit of thunder and a lot of barking dogs going on, so apologies my end. If you'd like to flick to the next slide, Henry.
Brilliant, and I think this is where kind of I come in, and this is the area which I will be leading on in the next phase. So where Roshan is leading very much on our work with those kind of big kind of statutory services offered by local authorities. I'm taking a look at kind of shared or common technology in Wales. And what I'm going to do is in this section, I'm going to cover why we're thinking about shared technology in Wales, a little bit of what we know already, some of the how we're going to do it, and then we'll launch into some hopefully fun and exciting breakout room sessions where we can really exploit all of the knowledge that we've got here in the room today. Next slide, please. So there's the reason we're doing this, and the reason that we've been led to think about this is for the kind of following reason and kind of following case study, which really sums up what the kind of advantages and kind of disadvantages can be with having common technology. So this case study here is ESS's sy'n system. So there was a system called syns by Capita, which was the most popular system across the UK for school information management, being used by about 85% of schools for kind of information management, that is taking registers, attendance, various kind of statutory information that schools take. Capita made the decision in December 2020 to sell syns to another company who now go by the name of ESS. And ESS decided to move from the 1-year support contracts, which Capita was previously offering, to a 3-year support contract term. And because of their dominant position in the market, the CMA is investigating in England, the Competition and Markets Authority, whether schools were given that sufficient time to consider their options instead of having to renew with ESS for the full 3 years, rather than the 1 year they'd have had to decide on previously. And what that's really done is shown to us that although you get the benefits of having one system in many different places, that is with kind of for example, teachers being very familiar with it, skills transference, best practice sharing between schools, you also get that downside risk of the kind of ability of perhaps a dominant supplier to make changes in the market, which may be beneficial or not beneficial. Next slide, please. So we've already done a little bit of research on this in the beta stage, and we have found that there's different areas have different distributions. So at one end, we have areas which have a very high usage of common systems. So for example, from our analysis, we found that 21 out of 22 Welsh local authorities were using Civica's Modern Gov platform. So that's an example of where one platform really is kind of dominant. In the content management system space, we found that there's kind of a slightly more mixed picture, but there's still kind of common suppliers. So for example, here we can see that in the middle, Contensis and Umbraco stand out as two of the most popular content management systems over the organizations that we spoke to. And over on the left, we can see in the space of providing kind of user account portals, mainly for local authorities, there's a much more kind of mixed supplier landscape. So although there are suppliers who are maybe slightly more popular, there's a broader range of suppliers in the space and a broader range of suppliers being used. So as we said, advantages and disadvantages to kind of both setups. Next slide, please. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to find out a bit more about this shared and common technology in Wales? But what we're going to do is we're going to carry out further research to identify common vendors. And the first starting step of that is if you've previously talked to us from a local authority, you will have received an email from the team with a small table to fill in where we're collecting information on some of very common systems, which we think have reason to believe may well be shared or have a shared vendor across the landscape. Next slide, please. So the systems that we've chosen at this stage for local authorities are a set of kind of 8 key shared functions. So enterprise resource planning, customer resource management, school information management, the contact centre, revenues and benefits, housing planning and social care. And we've chosen these because they are services provided across many local authorities, and we've also used the same criteria as Roshan described earlier, but the additional criteria we've used is it likely that in this area there would be one monolithic system rather than lots of small specialized systems. So for example, in waste collection, there might be lots of small niche systems in use, and we don't think it's likely that there would be one monolithic system where there would be one shared supplier. So as we said, we've gone out to local authorities and we'll be making a decision on whether to go out and do a similar process on sponsored bodies and health and care very shortly. Next slide, please. So we have some questions that we'd like to go through and ask you in a moment in the breakout rooms. And those are that we want to know some examples. So what common software vendors have you heard of in your experience working in the landscape in Wales or perhaps elsewhere? And then from that, what risks might there be in addition to the kind of ones we've stated about kind of suppliers making decisions on contracts? And what other risks are there of using that common software? And the flip side, what opportunities are there? So if we've got lots of people using the same vendor, what sort of opportunities does that bring us? Next slide, please. And at this point, I will pause and I'll ask if there are any questions on the plan for shared technology in the next phase. And then after questions, we'll go into breakout rooms. So happy to pause here and wait for questions. Sarah.
Will you be looking at any relationship between digital maturity and their vendor choice to see if there's any cross correlation between those things?
So we're taking a little look at the kind of more quantitative side with the shared technology work, but we are also engaging with more organizations in the next phase, and we will be able to add some of that qualitative flavor of kind of the relationship between digital maturity perhaps and the kind of use of the shared technology, but certainly it's maybe not one of the kind of key focuses that we've got, but it's certainly something that we will seek to address. I think that's a really great suggestion.
And can I just ask how much do you know about digital maturity from the work that you've already done? It's just because it's an area that we're quite interested in on the platform and services team.
So we have quite a good idea, I think, from the organizations we've spoken to. So within organizations, we've usually spoken to an organization level lead, followed by kind of service level leads. And we found that that's generally given us quite a good sense of the kind of maybe overall digital maturity of an organization. So of course, it's a slightly qualitative kind of metric based on kind of our own personal experiences, and we are able to make comparisons across the landscape, which I think is one of the benefits of this work. And so we probably could kind of come up with a reasonable kind of suggestion of maybe the more mature and less mature organizations.
Okay, great. I'll follow up with you on that separately. Thanks,
Sarah. There's a question in the chat from Andrew. I'll read it out and then I think, Anne, you've got a bit of a clarification. So are there plans to bring in WGSBs that support services in the prioritised areas to ensure sector-based considerations and approaches? I'm just wondering, Andrew, if you're able to come
Sure.
off. Oh, there we go. Yeah. That's
okay. I thought you might want to prioritise questions. But just thinking that in a lot of areas there are, if you're looking just at local authority services, that they're interacting with other Welsh government bodies. So for example, I work in social care. So if you were looking at social care, I'd hope that you were looking at other bodies that were supporting the social care sector, so that we had a sector-based consideration of systems requirements rather than just one perspective of social care, because ideally we'd want to think to try and make sure that systems started to collaborate across organizational boundaries. So so you've got your local authority lens at the moment, but I think depending on which areas you start to look at, it'd be really helpful to understand the network of organizations that provide a particular service before you start to look further into solutions, so that we've got that whole once for Wales sort of perspective on it.
I think that's a really, really good point, Andrew. I think Henry mentioned that we're still kind of thinking about, from the sponsored bodies we've met, how we want to approach this question. I think we've been we're probably not going to take quite the same approach that we've taken with local authorities with sponsored bodies in asking generally about systems, because of the much greater variety in the services delivered by different sponsored bodies. But I think you make a great point where there are specific organizations such as yourself that heavily overlap with those different sectors. So I think
but just as an example, for example, if local authorities were doing learning development systems across all of their organisations, then what bodies could they provide that information to that would support, for example, professional registration of workers? So there are areas that potentially can overlap and provide real whole system benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I think, yeah, perhaps one that we might pick up with yourself afterwards, Andrew, if that's okay.
We've got another question from Ruth. Your hand is up, Ruth.
Hi, thank you.
Ruth
Glazard, I'm the Vice Chair of Digital Health and Care Wales. I just wanted to reiterate Andrew's point, really. I think it strikes me that we're missing a trick if we're not actually talking about the underlying data platform and how we share that across systems so that systems can talk to each other. Because realistically, it doesn't matter what system you use as long as there's that basic level of interoperability, and that's how you can then help the information flow across the system. So it's about that underlying data platform. So I just want to, if I think about what we're trying to do at Digital Health and Care Wales and what we're trying to do across health with a consistent data platform, and some of the big pieces of work that you've mentioned, it's not about it's less about what's the front end and more about how do you have that consistent base level of platform underneath it. So I think I just want to echo Andrew's point, really, that if you want to be able to deliver seamless services across sector, you have to have that, and security, exactly. You have to have that underlying piece done. So it's actually less about the front end in some ways, because you can't deliver that without a consistent platform underneath.
Yeah, I think certainly that echoes a lot of what we've heard from health and care organisations, is that they really care when they've talked to us about getting integrations between systems sorted quickly, because the ability to deliver that kind of single patient journey from the start to the end of a healthcare experience, you really do need that interoperability of systems and that integration. I do think though that there is still a kind of a need to focus on that kind of that user-centered aspect of the design of the front end of systems, because for example, we've talked to services who've said, well, people still do this on paper because they say that the kind of the test results form that they have to fill in the kind of digital system is too slow, and perhaps that's something which might have been picked up on if there was kind of that more iterative, agile, user-centered approach on the front end, as well as kind of having that brilliant kind of interoperable data layer underlying those systems.
Thanks, Ruth and Henry. We've got another question from Joanna. I'm just conscious, and actually Vic, you put a great question in the chat. I'm wondering from the team, we've obviously got a lot of fantastic questions, but that's eaten up into our time for the breakout room quite considerably, which has given us about 7 minutes left. I'm wondering if it's just worth continuing with the questions, unless there's any alternative plans from the team.
I think that sounds like a good call, given how many questions we've had in the public group.
Great. Joanna, I think you were next up. You've got your hand.
Thank you. I'm very
Jo.
quickly, just following on from what Ruth said. I work at Digital Health and Care Wales on the Digital Services Patients in the Public programme. I've been in DHCW for many years now, and I think there's been a build-up really from for about nearly 15, 20 years, that there are lots of local legacy systems, and that we've got to now try and work out how to pull all those together. So if people have bought their own systems locally, and that, yes, it'd be lovely to be everything would be agile, but I think that's been a lot of the work, was trying to pull all those things together. So you have to take that on board, plus building your own systems as well. So lots of different things that you have to consider. Thank you.
Definitely, that's a helpful point that we'll definitely take on board when kind of bringing together the kind of health and care work we're doing.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Jo. Vic, I can see you've put a question in the chat that Anne has answered, but let me know if you want any more clarity on what the review will include.
No, it's all good. Thanks, Hannah.
Perfect. Thanks, Vic. Any other questions, comments, thoughts from anyone? We've got a couple of minutes left now.
I think if there's no kind of further questions, what would be really helpful for the work that I'm about to do is maybe we could just have a quick brainstorm in the chat box in the last kind of 6 minutes or so. I don't know, maybe Henry, you can move back us up. Perfect, thank you. If you could maybe put in suggestions of those, maybe more of those risks or opportunities of what might happen when you have those kind of shared vendors across many platforms. It'd be really good to get your kind of insight on that in the Zoom chat in the last kind of 5 minutes. I'll make sure I collect all of those responses.
Also, if anyone's got any kind of big comments in those sections, feel free to put your hand up and we can that you come off mute and talk about some of that stuff as well.
We've got our first one in the chat there. Thanks, Sarah. Kind of that risk of a cyber attack or compromise rippling through organizations. Yeah, that's a great one. One security hole exists in the same platform everywhere, then you have lots of vulnerable organizations all at once.
Shall I go down to the wrap up and start to wrap up? Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone that's here. If anyone has any final questions, do just put your hand up in these final moments. But please do feel free to get in touch either via our shared inbox or feel free to contact the team directly. I emailed everyone by the show and tell yesterday, so do feel free to get in touch if you have any thoughts, any questions, or any kind of connections that we can make with the team. We'd be really keen to hear it. You can also see all of our previous show and tells on YouTube, and we will upload this to YouTube in due course as well. And then finally, we're planning to run our next show and tell in, I actually think that date might be not updated. If someone in the team could clarify that for me. We're actually planning to run our next public show and tell from the landscape review in about a month. And that is because those two work streams that we're looking at are effectively looking to collect data from individuals in the landscape. So we're going to hold off until we can kind of report back what we found in about a month.
It's the 21st of June.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, so our next show and tell, and when we talk about what we found on these two work streams, will be on the 21st of June. 21st of May. Yeah. Great. Are there any final questions that we should talk about? Or shall we wrap up? Okay, I think I'll say thank you very much for everyone and that great discussion and great input. And we really appreciate all these risks that people are putting in the chat as well at the end. So thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to speaking to you in about a month.
Thanks, everyone. I'll leave the chat open for anyone who's still writing messages.
So. Henry, have you got the chat log? Are we ready to leave?
Yeah. I will close the room now. Just save the chat, and I'll close the room and stop the recording.